Ladies and gentlemen, let us get started with next session. Next session is special speech on Swedish Polish on women. I am so excited because I think we have so many things to learn. So let me invite our next speaker, His Excellency Jacob Holmgren, Ambassador of Sweden to Korea. Please welcome him to the stage with a warm round of applause. 여러분 뜨거운 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Fantastic. Thank you for that welcome, and thank you for the invitation to this conference. I think it's fantastic. I've said to others that this is one of the more lively and certainly most women-dominated conferences that I've ever been to in Korea, and it's so refreshing. The testimonies that you've shared, the little I've heard this morning, is really, really impressive. So I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I've been in contact with Mary O'Neill for almost a year, and I've been wanting to come before, but it wasn't possible. So we've been discussing, when I could come and what I should talk about. But I understand that, the reason why I have been invited as a man with grey hair in the mid-age, representing the country of Sweden, is to share some of the experiences of my country when it comes to women in business, and maybe more broadly, gender equality, how that has been, progressing in Sweden over the last, decades or even a century, I would say. So I'll share some words about that, if I may. And if you would like to, I would be more than willing to discuss both in a Q&A session afterwards or from the podium and afterwards on the sides. So, you know what? Sweden has a feminist government, and we have a feminist foreign policy. And that's, it's officially stated. And we have actually quite strict laws that ban anything that smacks gender discrimination. And I know, maybe not in this room, but in many other places, the word feminist is considered quite controversial. But, that is actually the intention. Because the idea is to leave an impression and to spark a debate and also maybe to inspire. And for me as a Swedish man, this is not particularly controversial. It's actually common sense if you think about it, because it reflects so much of what the Swedish society already is. If you try to define what feminism is, I realize, okay, well, that ticks all the boxes, what I think is just normal practice. This might be an extreme point of view, but I'll give you some reasons for why it has become like that in Sweden. So in my country, 12 out of 22 government ministers, cabinet ministers are women. 50% of the parliament are women. And it's really been like that for 20 years or so, but it did not always used to be like that. And I'd say that the overarching Swedish principle for gender equality is that everybody, regardless of gender, has the right to work or to support themselves, to balance career and the work life, or family life rather, and to live without fear of abuse. And I'd say that I think comparatively, comparing to other countries, Sweden has come a long way when it comes to the treatment of men and women in the workplace, which is approaching the subject of business that we were discussing. But the workplace and business, of course, happens in a bigger context. So just to give you some examples of landmark laws and decisions and developments in Sweden, I'd say that gender discrimination in the workplace has been outlawed in Sweden since 1980. And there is the Swedish Discrimination Act, the latest one, which is from 2009, demands that employers not only actively promote gender equality at the workplace, but also take measures against any harassment when it comes to gender equality. And following a further expansion of that law in 2017, only 2 years ago, that preventive work includes all grounds of discrimination. So we're talking about an employee's sex, transgender identity or expression, ethnicity, religion, belief, disability, sexual orientation, and age. And this is actually not only paper tigers, it's followed up. Doesn't, of course, not mean that this doesn't exist, but there's a very strong legal underpinning to act and a clear responsibility for any employers to act on it. So this act also states that employees and job applicants who are or have been or will be taking parental leave may not be treated unfairly. And we all know that that can be a huge issue, that you essentially get sacked if you're pregnant or if you say that you're maybe planning to become pregnant. Another really important law and development which was enacted already back in 1971 in Sweden were separate taxation. So before, the taxation within the household was considered as one, but then it was separated between men and women, and that actually made it financially more interesting for women to go out to the labor market to work, whereas with the common taxation, it was more economically interesting to stay at home and do unpaid work. So that was an important part of a bigger context or a bigger development that I'll come back to. Now, every year the World Economic Forum ranks more than 140 countries based on the gap between men and women according to indicators within health, education, economy, and politics. And actually, since at least 10 years, Sweden has never ranked lower than fourth rank. So now I know that you are from many countries here, but since I'm the ambassador to Korea, when I talk to South Koreans, something there very interesting is the Swedish welfare system. So in my country, we fund things like education and healthcare, social services, culture, etc., by taxes that are paid by Swedish citizens. And I know that in many countries this is a controversial concept. Of course, no one wants to pay more taxes. But we came up with something quite smart, I think, some 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, and that is how do you actually do to generate more taxes without having to pay more tax as an individual. You get more people to pay tax. If there's so many who pay tax, or there's so many to pay tax, if they pay the same tax, you get that generate more income. So we wanted to make sure as many people as possible worked, such as if both men and women work, that will generate more income to the state. And that's actually quite important, not only for the taxes, but also for gender emancipation and gender equality. And currently, Sweden has the highest rate of women who are working in the European Union, with almost 80% of all women who are working. Not all maybe full time, but every vast majority are actually going to work every day. So then the obvious question is, so since so many women are working and men, aren't the families and the kids suffering from that? Because who takes care of them? And that's, of course, a real thing, especially the, let's say, first 3 years of any children's life. Well, the reply is that no, actually, they're not suffering so much. And one indicator is that, in my country, every woman on average, gives birth to 1.9 kids. I think the EU average is 1.6, and I hear that, or I know that, unfortunately, Korea is struggling with less than one kid per woman. But I think that has to do with other things, such as the family policy. How do you actually support this possibility for men and women to work? And because it's important with that everyday puzzle and the work-life balance. So one example is that and I'm talking about the taxes that came from the fact that so many are working, and by the way, that started around 1980 or in the 1980s and the 1990s in Sweden. So that enables the government or the state or the public sector to pay for or to offer free daycare and free kindergarten. So up to the age of 6, 15 hours per week are completely free, and above that, up to essentially the whole working day is very affordable with a maximum rate. That happened in the 1970s, where it was essentially enacted or decided by the government that every household or every couple who's got kids who would like to work both, they should have the right to get affordable daycare within, let's say, 3 months. And then what happens after the age of 3 to 6? That's a typical, I'd say, gender gap, because then maybe the woman works less or goes home, etc. But then we have this system, and I know that this exists in many other countries, but I'm talking about the Swedish experience here, this after-school centers. So when school ends at maybe 2 o'clock in our system, if they're young, 1 o'clock even for the younger, and up to 3 or 4 when they're older, there's these after-school centers where it's not teachers, but it's like counselors who are able to take care of them until 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, or so when the end of the working day for the parents happens. So they go from school to the after-school centers, and then they're taking care of the whole day. And this is done, mainly within the public sector, but there's also private schools, etc., but all kind of under the same type of rules and regulations. Another thing that is as early as in 1975, then Sweden was actually the first country to replace gender-specific maternity leave with parental leave. So before that, it was kind of only, women. As it is today, parents are entitled to 480 days per child of paid parental leave. And if you work for the public sector, I work for the government, then you get a top-up. So you get essentially 90% of your ordinary salary when you take that parental leave for those 480 days. But the problem was, of course, Sweden is not, like any other country. But the problem was that, it was almost uniquely the women who took those days off, and there was a push that also daddies should take their time. So in '95, a so-called daddy month was introduced, which means that that is a month that is only kind of earmarked for the man, for the dad, and if the dad didn't use it, you wouldn't get that money for that month. And in 2002, that was extended to 2 months or 60 days. And by 2014, about 25% of all fathers took that total number of days available to the couples. And only 3 years ago, this was extended to 3 months. So if you all in all have maybe 19 months to deal with, if you don't take those 3 months as a dad, you'll only have 16 months of paid parental leave. And I'm proud to tell you that I'm also a father. I'm a father of 3 teenagers. They are today 14, 17, and 19 years old. But when they were about, a bit less than a year, I also took parental leave for 7 months each of those each of my 3 kids. And this is a time when it was, you know, still a little, this is about 2001, 2004, 2006, around that time. It was still a little bit, you know, controversial, but, you know, as you can see, it hasn't affected my career too badly, you know, since I've been able to continue in the public sector. All these things, you know, from shared parental leave to anti-discrimination laws, are ways that, you know, the Swedish government, Swedish society try to get, you know, or to help women to get a better opportunity also to succeed in business. Because as I've heard from some of the testimonies here, I mean, this is this family and everyday puzzle that is a huge challenge and impediment for everybody. Obviously, this is also the father's responsibilities, but in order to be able to pursue a career, you need to get some of those basics right, don't you? And I'm not trying to say that Sweden is some kind of a paradise or that everything is happy-go-lucky. We certainly have our challenges as well, and there are obstacles. So, for instance, the average board of a Swedish stock market company, you know, maybe a third are women, and of the listed companies on the Stockholm stock market, I think 9 of 10 CEOs are men. So this, you know, shows that even in business, this is still a challenge in a country like Sweden. But however, where kind of the should I put it, the official Sweden has a possibility to influence things, which is, you know, companies where the government owns the majority of the shares, there they've actively worked with gender policies. So as of this year, I think that on all of the companies, and I think there are some 250 of them that are, you know, partly or fully government owned, there are 50% of the boards and 50% of the CEOs and board chairs are not the CEOs, but the board chairs are men, and the other 50% are women. So in Sweden, over the years, there's been lively debates whether to introduce quotas, you know, quotas on the number of women on the board, quotas in terms of, you know, appointments of managers and etc. And, you know, there's arguments, you know, for and against. I'm sure you know them all. But interestingly enough, in Sweden, we've never taken the decision to actually institute numbered quotas. We thought that, you know, after all, competence is extremely important, right? So, and it actually feels better if you are a woman, if you are appointed, you know, because of my competence, rather than, you know, that there is a quota that I've kind of surfed in on. But this is not an easy issue, and I'm happy to discuss that more. And, you know, another challenge in my country and in, I think, all countries is the gender salary gap. So in my country, women in general in comparable positions are still earning less than men. It's about 88% of the 100% that then men would earn. And pay differences are the biggest, interestingly, in county councils, and they are the least in blue-collar type of work. So another way of illustrating that salary gap is that those 11% difference is that as if women essentially were basically work for free from 4 o'clock on a working day that ends at 5 o'clock, if you compare. And that's the type of arguments that often kind of emerge in the debate when we try to kind of push the limits, etc. And one way to address this is that as an employer, and I know because I used to be an employer for a research institute before I came to Korea, you are since a couple of years required every year to do a salary mapping where you compare salaries, positions from a gender perspective. So if you discover, I mean, you need to do that analysis, that mapping and the analysis, and you need to essentially report, okay, there are some unjust, salary differences that are not, explicable in any other way, that there is a gender gap, and what do you intend to do to address that? And then, I think there is a realization that things like that might not happen overnight, but, you need to be able to show that, okay, we are aware of this, we are intending to address this in the next few years, and so way. So, as you can hear, there's a lot of great things that have happened in Sweden over the last decades or so, but there's yet work to do also in our country to become equal when it comes to gender, and it will take time to do so. But I think it's important to keep on pushing forward, step by step, day by day, and to raise the voices in a constructive way, and maybe really challenge the authorities in the broad sense of that word, because I think we need to identify the inequalities where they are, and then try to find solutions where those issues are emerging. And I think in our country we have a strong tradition of pragmatism and trying to find good arguments for why you should address these issues, and then try to find solutions that are difficult to essentially object to as an employer, as it were, etc. And I'd like to give one example. Sweden has a new foreign minister. We used to have a lady called Margaret Wallström. She resigned a couple of weeks ago, and there's now a new female foreign minister. Her name is Ann Linde, and she used to be the minister for foreign trade. So coming back to this notion of feminist foreign policy, she's into quotas and business and, trade agreements, etc. And then, what? She found something quite peculiar. And that is that, female items, clothes, etc., had higher quotas than, equivalent male clothing and items. I mean, how can that be possible? So then that's when she said, I'm going to pursue a feminist trade policy, because these differences are not just, and they are not, there must be a way to address them. Yeah, okay, I will conclude soon. But I'd like to say that, the Swedish example shows that equality can be achieved in government, in the public sector, in the society at large, but also in business. And as a personal reflection, I could say that, I've seen those changes in the last 30 to 40 years in our societies. I mean, attitudes have changed, and they can change, and it is possible if it's pushed and addressed in the right way. And I used to be in research in peace and security, etc. And I know there's actually research supporting that, more gender equal societies are not only happier and healthier, they're actually also richer. And I think that the Nordic countries is a living example of that. I'm talking about Sweden, but what I'm saying to you here today is the same story that you'd find in Denmark or in Finland or in Iceland or in Norway and in some other countries as well. And obviously there are other countries, but this is where I come from. But this is an everyday discussion, and it is a struggle to deal with these issues. And I can also say as a man that gender equality, I've come to realize that it's not a threat. It's a huge opportunity. When I joined the foreign ministry, which was in the 1990s in Sweden, the vast majority of my colleagues and the bosses were men, and I saw a photo from 1971 of all the kind of Swedish ambassadors at the time. There was one woman. Today, 48% of all Swedish ambassadors are women. And I was away a couple of years because I was on a leave of absence at this research institute. And when I come back and I've seen this change, which has actually happened relatively quickly over the last decade or so, I find a nicer, more diverse, and more challenging and smarter and sharper workplace. So I've come to realize that it's not a threat, it's a huge opportunity. And I realized that this is a very unique and maybe extreme example in the case of Sweden for some of you, but you know, that's my experiences and from our country. So thank you very much that you wanted to listen to me today, and I look forward to discussion. I don't know if we should do Q&A now, or...
Do you want to?
Well, if you want to.
Do we have any questions, or?
Diane.
Maybe your presentation was just too outstanding, so no one has any questions. Oh, okay. 마이크 전달 부탁드리겠습니다.
Hello. The biggest thing that we're going in Australia is on the quotas.
Yeah.
Now, what we're finding is that the unions in our country are giving chairmen of corporations very bad times, pushing and pushing and ringing and threatening.
Four quotas, or again?
4 quotas to be on their boards.
Ah.
We as women are fighting it because we don't want quotas. We want to be appointed in our own merit. And the thought that someone would be appointed just because she's a woman and probably doesn't know anything about the corporation at all and what it stands for, we find that as an insult. So we also are having a great deal of trouble trying not to have quotas. But then we have the feminist groups that want the quotas. But we, as women in the business world, we don't want it. My question, do you have trouble with the unions?
I mean, no, not really, not on that particular issue. And it sounds a bit strange that the unions would have a different view than you know, that they're not listening to. I mean, I guess that some of the union members would also have the view that you just said, that you wouldn't like to have quotas. So I suppose that they should listen to their own members, maybe, because I mean, it seems as if you know, they're. I mean, it's counterproductive for the kind of bigger cause of promoting competent women, which obviously.
I wish they would hear that. But we have very, very vigilant unions who are not listening to anyone. They are wanting one thing, and they don't care how they get it.
I know that is the case in many countries, including in Korea. Yeah, I mean, this is a big issue, the whole issue of social dialogue, and how do you ensure that unions, if you talk about unions, become a force for good for the companies and for the wider economy. I think that the experience, not only from Sweden but from, you know, large parts of Europe, I know that this is the case in Germany as well, is to empower unions and make sure that they become part of the decisions, the welfare and the development of companies. Essentially, that you give responsibility, you empower them, and then they'll also, I mean, more people who are maybe less extreme and, you know, more you know, responsibility taking will also come to dominate those unions, and that's how you really make sure that you get many to join in a bigger development, which is less antagonistic, maybe. It's easy to say, but I can only say that is the case in not everywhere, but in many parts of the Europe that I know.
Thank you for your wonderful question. And do we have time to accept one more question?
Well, you decide. But I saw another question there.
Yes, actually, we need to wrap up, but we'll take just one more question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to ask question. I have a question that what kind of opportunities you see for Afghan women entrepreneurs to come to Sweden and to have their businesses to represent their companies? Thank you.
Well, it's difficult for me to reply to that off the cuff, but I know that we have quite an extensive program in Afghanistan at this research institute that I referred to before, called the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. We actually conducted a study on the private sector development in your country, including regarding how to empower women as leaders and entrepreneurs in the private sector. I cannot talk for Swedish SIDA. I know they have an important program, so I would suggest that you contact them and have a discussion on how you could maybe discuss an exchange or knowledge sharing, because I think, it sounds as if it's entirely in line with the priorities that they should be pursuing.
Well, thank you so much. It was actually really interesting for me as well that we can see gender equality as an opportunity. So that was very insightful. Why don't we give a big hand to our ambassador? Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, let us move on to our next session right away. We have session 4 titled Fly on the Wings of Inspiration. Let me introduce our moderator for session 4, Jana Vladimirov, president of Russian College in Busan and Russia Culture Center in Busan. Please welcome our moderator to the stage with a big round of applause.
예, 저 소개부터 먼저 하겠습니다. 저는 러시아 교포 3세이고요. 이 러시아 말은 국어인데요. 한국어랑 영어는 완벽하지 않아서 좀 양해 부탁합니다. 그래서 오늘은 우리 세션의 이름은 Fly on the Wings of Inspiration. 그래서 우리가 지금 러시아, 몽골리아, 한국, 카자흐스탄 손님을 모시고 왔습니다. 좀 무대에 나와주시기 바랍니다. 먼저 우리 첫 손님을 소개하도록 하겠습니다. Director of External Affairs in the Green Climate Fund, Mrs. Oyun Sanjasuren.
Can I go there or from here? From here. Or just sitting, right? Okay, good. Good afternoon, dear ladies, but also gentlemen. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to address the Women Leadership Forum, but also I understand a lot of women businesses and entrepreneurs from International Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you, Jana. My name is Oyun Sanjasuren. I'm currently working as Director of External Affairs of the Green Climate Fund. And the Green Climate Fund is headquartered here in Korea. And we're very thankful to the government of Korea for having this leadership to host the Green Climate Fund. Our organization is dedicated to serve and provide funding in more than 100 developing countries to leapfrog from business as usual, brown business growth, to cleaner, greener, and low-carbon development path. I would like to thank you all of you here, women gathered at this forum today. And although I've been living and working in Korea for more than 1 year, this is the first time I come to Busan. I hear that it's very beautiful and very progressive and young city, or dynamic with youth. I would like to thank all of you for your leadership, entrepreneurship, and courage. I just arrived, but I could see some of the booths, and I think each of you have already made incredible contributions in your own field, businesses and communities. And I'm very happy to see the inspiration that you provide to many women in our countries. I think all of us have to contribute to the solutions that the world is facing today, and even more so, I think, as women, we also carry and shoulder that in all of our lives. As you know, the world is facing an unprecedented number of challenges today. And they're very complex, and they need integrated and holistic solutions. While global population has doubled between 1950 and now, the global water use roughly tripled, consumption of Many resources like coal, oil, natural gas increased nearly 5 times. The global middle class, and we today are talking about the global growth as well, is expected to grow. The global economy is expected to grow by 300% by 2050. And if the consumption patterns are going to grow the same way as they have been in the last decades, it's going to put a major stress on energy, water demand, but also on natural resources as well. At the same time, the Earth, it now takes our Mother Earth 1 year and 6 months to regenerate what we use in 1 year. The humanity now is turning resources into waste faster than it can be turned back into resources, and we're depleting the resources of the Earth on which human life and biodiversity depend. So we've already approached the point where the economic model that existed for the past centuries, where natural capital, forests, land, water, biodiversity, the nature, was not valued, pollution and global warming was overlooked, and this pattern and this economic model is no longer sustainable. And I'm emphasizing it in the introduction, something which we all know, and I'm sure you all know in your businesses, and you're all trying to change the way we all do things, including change the way we all do business as well. This morning, I read a report where CEOs name climate change as the top risk to organizational growth in 2019. It was KPMG's 2019 Global CEO Outlook, and apparently they are doing it for the 5th year. And 1,300 CEOs across 11 key markets and 11 key industry sectors indicated that 3/4 of 1,300 CEOs indicated that their business organization's growth will depend on their ability to navigate the shift to a low-carbon, clean technology economy. And this is all on top of technological disruption, return to territorialism, cybersecurity, operational risks. All these traditional risks, which used to be on the top, are actually now overwhelmed by environment and climate-related risks. I'm sure you know about also World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report. Annually, they report what are the main top risks that the world is facing. And the last 5 years, the top 5 risks in terms of livelihood and impact were again extreme weather conditions, failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation, natural disasters, and water security. And again, only a few years ago, these risks will not be nowhere in the top, but it will be traditional risks like economic crisis, terrorism, interstate conflicts. But they have all shot to the top of the list. And they just shot to the top, not just because of nothing, but because there are real threats and real risks that we're facing. It is a survival issue, and but talking about the businesses and trade and women entrepreneurship, going greener is no longer anti-market, anti-profit anymore. This is a great opportunity now because financiers, investors are all aligning their policies with not all, but many are aligning their policies to go greener. Government policies are changing. We've heard the Swedish ambassador. Sweden is one of the leading countries with this. And most importantly, we see a tremendous change in the attitude of consumers. We also, last week, millions of youth in more than 160 cities around the world demonstrating to demand from all of us, grown-ups, the change in the way we do things. We have been all inspired by Greta, 16-year-old teenager, again from Sweden, who calls for our conscience to act. So the next decade will be really crucial, whether we can win against the climate change. And I'm talking about the climate change because I currently work in the sector, and as Jana asked, I will also come back to my personal story, why I went into this field. all the decisions we all, and you all ladies, will make in your investment decisions, in your businesses, will actually lock in emissions for the next decades to come, will lock in all the environmental consequences and environmental footprints, and we owe to the next generation, and we see the call from all the youth to the next generation that we owe them more better and sustainable future. We cannot make any mistakes with our businesses, with our investments and government policies. I now work for the Green Climate Fund, and again, I think for businesses, Green Climate Fund is an example of where the trends are going and where the opportunities are for businesses. For the last 4 years, and the fund has been operational in the last 4 years, we've mobilized more than $5 billion, which leveraged about $18 billion of investment in low-carbon, climate-resilient projects in almost 100 countries. And they include renewable energy, green buildings, sustainable infrastructure, water management, climate-resilient infrastructure, agriculture, forestry, and land use. And this investment don't only go to public sector, almost 40% of the funding also went to private sector, because we know that if we want to shift if we want to make the major changes and leapfrogging to greener in developing countries, that's where the private sector will play the biggest role. We provide very innovative financial instruments, such as loans, guarantees, equity, grants, that will design bespoke solutions that will de-risk the investment. So if one does business as usual, brown business, and want to leapfrog to greener, then organizations like Green Climate Fund, and there are not only us, it's Multilateral Development Bank, national development banks, commercial banks, they're changing their way they invest in their business. So the difference between brown and green, de-risking, is now possible in order for private sector also to try to leapfrog to greener. I come from Mongolia, and I'm very happy to see very dynamic group of our Mongolian entrepreneurs and businesswomen. And thank you. And I remember you very proudly and ably hosted the International Women Federation the same conference last year in Mongolia, or 2 years ago, right? Yeah, you've been working very hard, I remember. So we come from a country with a rich long nomadic history. Our nomadic herders, which are almost still 1/4 of the population, still live as nomadic herders. They lived in harmony with nature and their land for centuries. We like to believe that our nomadic civilization is a green civilization. Nowadays, the idea is to have very sustainable consumption, recycle, use less, have less waste. So if you look at herders, a single sheep will give a family its meat, its milk, its wool, and its felt. The felt will be used to make the felt lining of the nomads' yurts, dwellings, but also to make a warm winter shoe. We also use animal dung by burning it for heating, and the dung is also used for winter animal shelters as well, because by creating floor made of dung, the animals are able to save some insulation from the freezing ground. So the herder knows how to use every single part of the livestock, and it's like, a full circular economy. Unfortunately, although it's been for hundreds and thousands of years that, herders will also use pastures, have them rest, move to another pastures. It's supposed to be very green, sustainable livelihood. But unfortunately, we see seasonal patterns changing. Our land is drier. Definitely, there is less biodiversity in the Mongolian steppe. And we see more pasture degradation, and desertification is creeping more and more to the north. This is because global warming is also affecting Mongolia. Mongolia warmed up twice as intensely as the rest of the world. We all know the global temperatures are getting to 1 degree Celsius, warmed up, and then Mongolia, for example, warmed up 2.2 degrees Celsius. That's because of climatic conditions and other geographical conditions. Of course, we're a small population and we haven't really contributed to the climate change, but we already see the disproportionate impact. And that's why I think all of us have to really, not only in Mongolia, but around the globe, to take it very, very seriously. I'm an earth scientist by profession, a geologist, and worked early in my career as a geologist in the field most of the time. And then I entered politics about 20 years ago, back at home in Mongolia, and followed the path of my late brother, Zorik. My brother Zorik was pro-democracy leader. He was only 27, where he and his colleagues stood up against then a very regressive communist regime and led the popular movement that resulted in sweeping democratic changes in the country. They didn't only have the courage to stand up against, but also had a vision where to go, vision for progressive future of the country. Very sadly and tragically, he was assassinated 21 years ago when he was serving as member of parliament and also when he was just about to be nominated as a candidate for the prime minister's position. That's why I entered the politics, followed in the path of my brother. At the first few years of my career in politics, of course, because of the circumstances I went into politics, I called for cleaner politics, for more transparency, for major move also on anti-corruption. So, because I was asked to share some of the personal story. As a member of parliament, for example, I declared first my income and assets. Again, that was 18 years ago, publicly, where most other politicians will sort of laugh and say, "Oh, she's probably bringing something from the West," because I came from England when I finished my PhD and worked in a mining company. And then, of course, now after 10 years later, it became a standard for most politicians, but also public servants, to declare income and assets. Of course, I contributed leading to the working groups on anti-corruption, on good governance, also Freedom of Information Act, conflict of interest. So if you call for something, you have to be part of implementation as well. Then about 10 years ago, the party that I led, Civil Will Green Party, we called for very pro-green, pro-environmental policies as well. And when I had the privilege to serve as Mongolia's Minister for Environment and Green Development, again, we introduced the first green development strategy for Mongolia, got it passed through the parliament, a number of what we feel progressive reforms, like increasing the tariffs for use of natural resources, including water tariffs, not for households, but for industries, especially mining, and the revenues will go to the provincial budget so that can be spent back on environment and water resource management. We also introduced many other legislation, including for cleaner technologies and greener development as well. Of course, being a women leader, we also tried our best to contribute to advancement of women's position in society. I was very interested to hear about the quota. We had to introduce women's quota in politics for women running for the parliament, because if you have what's called power of incumbency, where majority of politics and members of parliament and decision-making positions are filled by men from the beginning, and at some point out of 76 members of parliament, there will be only 3 women in the parliament, you have to introduce quota in order to bridge this difference. Because if you are not an incumbent, if from the beginning the stereotypes, but also money in politics prevail, it's very difficult for new women, for new young candidates to run. So it's taken us some time and quite a lot of fight as well, but we managed to introduce the quota, and now the number went up to almost 20%. Since I was convinced that environmental and climate and other sustainability-related challenges that we're facing are the biggest challenges that we face, both back at home but also globally. That's why I decided after 15 years in politics to move, to dedicate my time and life to sustainability, climate-related issues, and that's why I moved to the Green Climate Fund 2 years ago, just over a year ago, and I'm we're very busy there, but we're very also proud that we're trying to contribute to the solutions. And also I'm a very proud mother of 3, and I think we all owe to the next generation so that the world that they will inherit will be sustainable and in a balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 그러면 질문은 다음에 하도록 하겠습니다. 우리 다음 손님은 카자흐스탄 여자분입니다. Yulia Unyaeva. She is a CEO of BBH Trading Company in Seoul and organizer of Kim magazine in Seoul for the Russian-speaking people and the organizer of the Russian family club, which is called Ahana.
Когда-то я прочла статью психолога Елены Пастернак под названием «Роскошная жизнь» и подумала, что все же есть люди, которые, как и я, считают роскошью не то, что обычно принято считать роскошью. Сегодняшнее мое выступление навеяно именно этой статьей. Когда я получила приглашение поучаствовать в саммите успешных женщин, я улыбнулась. Я успешна? Но ведь у меня нет личного самолета или яхты. Я живу в обычной квартире в Сеуле. У меня нет золотых слитков в ячейке швейцарского банка. Я вкалываю по 20 часов в сутки и на связи 24 часа 365 дней в году. Мой муж такой же пахарь. Мои сестры, племянники и дочь не мажорики. Но я без ложной скромности все же могу назвать себя успешной. Почему? Потому что могу позволить себе заниматься тем, что желает мое сердце. Нет, конечно, я много чего себе не могу позволить. Например, спать, когда болеет мама или дети. Отправиться в отпуск, когда завал на работе. Забыть о людях, которые рядом, которые стараются делать что-то вместе со мной, которые тоже хотят стать успешными и от которых зависит и мой успех тоже. Я успешна, потому что у меня прекрасная семья, потому что мои сестренки, племянники, дочь знают цену копейки и посвящают себя работе так, как это был бы их собственный бизнес. Все мои родные и друзья – неравнодушные люди, всегда готовы отозваться на любую просьбу, а тем более беду. Я успешна, потому что имею возможность жить так, чтобы радоваться каждому дню, ходить в рваных джинсах, не выставлять фотки еды в Инстаграме, чтобы все знали, что сегодня мне удалось поесть, например, фуагра, потому что могу есть то, что захочу. Не ставить галочки в списке стран, где удалось побывать, а лететь, сломя голову, лишь в Австралию, туда, где живут родные мне люди. Я чувствую себя успешной, потому что у меня есть мечта, к которой я иду, и пытаюсь чувствовать себя счастливой, потому что мне кажется, что то, чем я занимаюсь, кому-то очень важно и нужно. Успешная жизнь – это жить по своим правилам, прожить с мужем 33 года и мечтать прожить с ним еще столько же. Позволять крикнуть 73-летней маме, когда на перекрестке загорится зеленый свет: «Побежали, мам!» И она энергично бежит вместе с тобой. Идти к своим целям, не реветь над комментариями, не завидовать, не уподобляться и не прогибаться, не следить за конкурентами, а 24 часа в сутки заниматься любимым делом, даже во сне. Я успешный, но не свободный человек. И мне все же приходится делать иногда то, чего бы я не хотела делать. Например, так получилось, что я занимаюсь оптовыми поставками алкоголя в Корею. Это то, что омрачает нашу с мужем жизнь. Но из всего плохого приходится вытягивать хорошее и оправдывать себя. Алкоголь – это не всегда плохо. В разумных пределах алкоголь дарит людям веселье и отдых. А самое главное, продажа алкоголя приносит прибыль, которую можно потратить на осуществление своих безумных целей. У меня таких идей много, и сейчас я вам о них расскажу. Мы затеяли большой проект, но осуществить его сложно. Он требует больших вложений и финансовых, и интеллектуальных. Небольшая команда профессионалов старается как только может. И вот что у нас есть. Информационно-культурный центр КИМ, Корея и мы, запланирован как стартовая площадка для объединения активистов в различных сферах деятельности. Интернет-журнал «Ким. Корея и мы» знакомит читателей всего мира с Кореей, с ее историей, культурой, традициями, делится информацией о политической и экономической жизни страны. Журнал задуман как стартовая площадка для развития бизнеса в Корее. У журнала есть странички в Фейсбуке, Инстаграме, Твиттере, канал в Ютубе, сайт. Недавно мы создали студию юных журналистов, где будем обучать детей грамотно делиться информацией со своими сверстниками. Раз в полгода планируется печатать бумажную версию детского журнала для детей при помощи детей под названием «КИД» – «Корея и дети». В Корее очень популярна национальная игра «Падук». Игра в шахматы здесь только начинает набирать популярность. Но мы, русскоязычные, чуть ли не с рождения любим шахматы. Поэтому в Сеуле открылся наш шахматный клуб 64, где мы не только обучаем детей шахматам, но и проводим турниры. Для совсем маленьких обучение проходит в игровой форме. Семейный клуб «Ахана». Название «Ахана» означает «семья». Это не только кровные родственники, но и друзья, друзья друзей, объединенные общими интересами и ценностями, помогающие друг другу. На базе клуба работают различные кружки – творческие, спортивные, танцевальные. Дети и родители не просто занимаются в кружках, но и готовятся к проведению мероприятий и участвуют в них. Например, такие как День защиты детей, новогодняя елка, детский музыкальный конкурс «Мирекум Наму». У нас также есть авторская спортивная программа «Медоед», которая заточена не только под физическое, но и психологическое развитие детей. Медоед – это самое смелое животное в мире, а страхи в жизни детей, да и взрослых тоже, играют роль тормоза в преодолении трудностей, достижения целей и определения жизненного кредо. Задача клуба не только организовать досуговое образование, но и создать команду волонтеров, занимающихся благотворительностью. В таком ракурсе и проходят различные мероприятия. В самом начале у нас был просто детский клуб, но и родители тоже стали проявлять живой интерес и желание участвовать. И тогда детский клуб плавно и естественно превратился в семейный. Наш первый праздник в честь Дня защиты детей был посвящен детям с особенностями развития. Мы подготовили концерт под девизом «Не молчи», где призывали родителей особенных детей не прятать их, и всех остальных призывали не разделять детей на обычных и особенных. Символом праздника стала рыбка, нарисованная девочкой Асем, которая лечилась в Корее в онкологической клинике. Мы сделали принты рыбки на футболке и продавали их, чтобы собрать деньги на лечение Асем. В этом году мы присоединились к сбору финансов на лечение мальчика из Узбекистана, сильно обгоревшего в пожаре. Узнали мы о нем от благотворительного казахстанского движения волонтеров «Я рядом». К нам подключились местные фонды, корейские. Об Ахтиёре узнал ожоговый центр «Халим» и взялся за лечение мальчика бесплатно. Мы открыли в Facebook группу поддержки, и в итоге помочь 6-летнему мальчику взялись граждане 3 стран – Казахстана, Кореи и Узбекистана. Ну и присоединялись люди других русскоязычных стран. Люди оказывали моральную поддержку, несли игрушки, еду, одежду. Особенную роль в жизни Бахтиёра, привыкшего к одиночеству, и тех детей, которые пришли проведать лечившегося мальчика, сыграл День обнимашек. Дети поняли, что есть на свете такие же обычные ребята, только нуждающиеся в еще большей любви и заботе. Сейчас мы совместно с компанией по производству детской одежды Seventeen планируем запустить в производство футболки с мотивирующими надписями. Например, «Силен поступками», «Стать супергероем легко» и тому подобное. И дарить их в ответ на пожертвования в пользу развития социальных и благотворительных проектов. Кстати, мы будем рады, если среди вас будут желающие присоединиться к нашей акции. Можно рассмотреть различные варианты сотрудничества. Дети – будущее планеты, должны жить в мире и взаимопонимании. А понять и принять это они могут от нас, взрослых. Каждый ребенок должен знать, что всегда кто-то рядом. Он не один, нас миллионы. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое. 우리 다음 손님은요, SK건설 상무 이사님이신 이현경 이사님이십니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 앞에 두 분이 이야기하는 거 들으면서 굉장히 저도 많은 걸 배웠습니다. Global Women Leaders Forum, 지속적으로 이 행사를 주최해오신 측 여러분들께 이 의미 깊은 행사에 초청해 주셔서 먼저 감사의 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 글로벌 그리고 women, leader 그 세 개의 단어의 공통점을 보면 전 세계적으로 리더를 꿈꾸는 혹은 리더의 자리에 있는 여성들의 마음속에 공통적으로 어떤 이슈가 있을까를 먼저 생각을 해봤습니다. 그건 바로 일과 가정을 균형적으로 그리고 성공적으로 관리하면서 나의 꿈을 어떻게 이루어갈 것인가 하는 것이 바로 우리 공통의 숙제가 아닐까 싶어요. 그래서 오늘은 저는 그 이야기를, 저의 인생 이야기를 솔직하게 여러분하고 나누면서 저는 어떻게 그 숙제를 풀어갔는가 함께 나누려고 합니다. 먼저 제 소개를 아까 간단히 해주셔서 감사드리고요. 저를 가장 잘 표현할 수 있는 세 개의 숫자를 여러분에게 먼저 소개를 해드리겠습니다. 먼저 12라는 숫자가 있습니다. 12가 뜻하는 것은 뭘까요? 저의 첫 직장이 MBC라는 그 방송국이었어요. 그 방송국에서 저는 아나운서를 했고 또 편성 PD를 약 12년 동안 했습니다. 그 다음 숫자가 2019년이네요. 저는 아나운서와 PD를 하고 나서 뉴질랜드에 가서 법대를 다시 다녔고요. 그리고 뉴질랜드에서 변호사로 활동을 하다가 이제 2019년도에 저는 그 파이낸셜 타임스에서 주는 아시아 퍼시픽 이노베이티브 로이어스 어워즈를 수상을 했습니다. 굉장히 기쁜 순간이었고요. 그 다음 숫자는 3입니다. 3이 뭐냐면 제가 아까 모더레이터 분이 소개를 해주시기를 SK건설의 계약실장 상무라고 소개를 해주신 것 같은데요. 지금 10대 건설사에서 여성 임원이 3명밖에 없습니다. 영광스럽게도 제가 그 3명 중에 하나입니다. 여기까지 말씀을 드리면 굉장히 화려한 그런 직업을 거치면서 살았다라고 생각들을 하실 텐데요. 저는 오늘 이런 화려한 직업을 거치면서 제가 어떤 성과를 이뤘는지를 이야기하고 싶지 않습니다. 다른 이야기를 하고 싶습니다. 바로 저의 리얼리티, 저의 정체성, 그리고 여러분에게 자랑스럽게 제가 말씀드릴 수 있는 그런 것들을 얘기하고 싶어요. 그 첫 번째가 바로 또 다른 삶입니다. 아까 첫 번째 스피커께서 새 아이의 엄마라고 했는데 저도 역시 새 아들의 엄마입니다. 사실 제가 가진 여러 타이틀 중에서 저는 이 새 아들의 엄마라는 타이틀이 가장 좋고 또 가장 자랑스럽습니다. 두 번째 숫자는 40이에요. 40살에 제가 뉴질랜드에 가서 다시 오클랜드 법대에 들어갔습니다. 그리고 변호사가 됐죠. 그 다음 또 의미 있는 숫자가 47인데요. 제가 뉴질랜드에서 3년 정도 상법 중심의 그 로여로 프랙티스를 했는데 47세 저한테는 전혀 새로운 분야인 건설업계의 계약 담당자로 다시 저의 또 다른 커리어를 시작을 했습니다. 네. 이런 저의 인생을 커리어 측면에서의 어떤 변화가 있었는지를 먼저 말씀을 드리고, 제가 처음에 말씀드렸던 주제, 일과 가정을 어떻게 균형 있게 관리하면서 각자의 꿈을 성취할 수 있을지에 대해서 제가 생각하는 3가지 그 키워드를 여러분에게 말씀을 좀 드리려고 합니다. 첫 번째는 가정이에요. 저는 3 아들을 가졌는데 나라마다 많이 다를 거예요. 중국에서는 한 자녀 운동이 있기 때문에 한 자녀가 굉장히 대부분인 것으로 알고 있고, 지금 우리 한국도 역시 한 자녀 혹은 2 자녀예요. 그래서 제가 아들이 3입니다고 하면 한국에서는 많이 놀랍니다. 특히 제가 아나운서로 일했던 1980년대 후반, 1990년대 초반에는 사실은 저희 아나운서 동기 여기 정보영 씨가 있지만 그 당시에는 결혼을 하면 일단 무언의 압력이 있어요. 아, 저 여자 그만두겠구나. 그리고 나서도 안 그만두고 임신을 하고 출산을 하고 나서 자녀를 키우면서 다니면 남편이 좀 경제적으로 어려운가? 라고 생각할 정도로 여자들은 결혼하고 임신하고 출산하면 당연히 자기의 커리어를 그만둬야 하는 그런 때가 있었습니다. 그런데 아이 2을 낳고 기르면서 그 MBC를 다녔는데 마지막에 기대치 않았던 셋째 아들이 선물처럼 찾아왔고, 그때 저는 선택을 했었어야만 했습니다. 국제적으로 그리고 저희 한국에서도 아이가 태어나면서 일을 그만둬야 하는 엄마들이 많은 것으로 알고 있어요. 저는 그때 어떤 선택을 했냐면, MBC에서는 나를 대신해서 일할 수 있는 사람이 많이 있지만 이 3 아이한테는 내가 가장 좋은 엄마일 수 있다. 대체할 수 있는 사람이 없다라고 생각을 했고, 저는 그것이 커리어를 희생했다라고 생각하지 않고 제 인생에서 가장 좋은 선택이었다라고 생각을 합니다. 뉴질랜드에서 법대를 졸업하고 변호사가 되기 전에 연수원을 다녀야 했어요. 연수원의 졸업식 날, 그 졸업식 장에서 원장님께서 저희 졸업생들에게 당부하는 말씀을 하셨습니다. 여성들이 여기 대부분 그 당시만 해도 연수원을 졸업하는 그 학생 중에 반 이상이 여성이었어요. 그런데 그 당시에 뉴질랜드는 전 세계적으로 참정권을 여성에게 가장 먼저 부여한 나라입니다. 그럼에도 불구하고 로펌의 파트너들은 거의 대부분이 남성입니다. 여성에게 어느 정도 유리천장이 있는 것이고요. 그렇다면 여성 변호사로서 성공할 수 있는 비결이 무엇인가? 그분은 서포터를 확보하는 것이라고 했습니다. 제 개인적인 얘기를 하다 보니까 또 제 개인적인 소개를 하게 되는데, 저희 어머니가 저기 계신데요. 저희 어머니가 늘 저를 기도로 서포트를 해줬고요. 또 저희 3 아들이 저의 가장 조력자가 되어서 이 모든 커리어를 다 할 수 있었던 그런 원동력이 되지 않았나 하는 생각을 합니다. 2 번째 이야기로 넘어가겠습니다. 40살에 법대 입학 허가서를 받아 들고 텍스트북과 많은 케이스를 둔 케이스북을 미리 교수님한테 부탁해서 받아서 법대 도서관에 앉았을 때 그 마음을 저는 아직도 기억합니다. 가슴이 굉장히 두근거렸고요. 아, 이제 내가 정말 하고 싶은 일을 한다라는 느낌이었습니다. 그러나 그 가슴 두근거리는 일을 하면서도, 공부를 시작하면서도 쉽지가 않았어요. 저희의 모든 학자금은 융자를 받았고 정부 보조금으로 생활을 했습니다. 3 아들과 함께 슈퍼마켓에 가서 저의 버짓은 정해져 있기 때문에 아이들 몰래 아이가 고른 물건을 내려놓기도 했습니다. 그리고 날마다 아침마다 4개의 도시락을 싸서 학교 도서관으로 갔고요. 그런 그 피, 땀, 눈물에 세월이 흘렀습니다. 그리고 나서 저는 법대를 잘 졸업할 수가 있었습니다. 여기에서 제가 말씀드리고 싶은 것은 경력이 단절되고 나서 4년 동안 저는 풀타임 맘으로 있었거든요. 그리고 다시 새로운 일을 시작할 때 겁도 났고 또 동시에 가슴이 두근거리는 그런 새로운 도전이었습니다. 그런데 여러분 다 잘 될 거예요 라고 등 두들겨 주고 싶지 않습니다. 희망적 낙관주의 이야기하는 거 아닙니다. 한번 가슴 뛰는 일을 선택을 했으면 거기에는 피가 있어야 되고 땀이 있어야 되고 눈물이 어린 수고가 있어야 됩니다. 저는 잠자는 시간 빼고 13시간씩 공부를 했었습니다. 세 번째 토픽으로 넘어가겠습니다. 제가 지금 하는 일을 설명을 드릴게요. SK건설에서 저는 계약 실장을 맡고 있습니다. 제 밑에 50명의 계약 전문가들이 있고요. 계약실에서는 뭘 하냐면 발주처에게 그리고 우리 하도업체에게 하는 모든 계약을 국내 해외 프로젝트 담당을 합니다. 저희 프로젝트 규모가 굉장히 커요. 그래서 수천억 불에서 그러니까 500 million US dollars, 900 US million dollars, 1 billion or 5 billion US dollars 정도의 규모의 굉장히 큰 프로젝트의 계약을 저희가 체결을 합니다. 또 해외에서 하다 보면 공기가 많이 지연이 돼요. 그리고 적자가 나기도 쉽습니다. 그럴 때 저희가 클레임을 통해서 그 적자를 그 손실을 보존하는 작업을 합니다. 그 클레임을 저희가 담당을 합니다. 사실 2013년도, 14년도에는 우리 한국 건설사들이 해외 프로젝트를 수주하면서 저가 수주를 해서 피 흘리는 경쟁을 했었어요. 그러니까 저가로 도저히 할 수 없는 금액에 비딩을 해서 그래서 프로젝트를 수행하면 할수록 코스트 오버런이 나는, 그래서 클레임이 아니면 이 도저히 손실을 만회할 수 없는 일이 있었음에도 불구하고 저희 회사에는 클레임 전문가가 없었습니다. 클레임 타스크포스가 만들어졌고 단 3명으로 출발을 했고, 그때 저는 클레임을 몰랐어요. 그런데 제가 하겠다고 손을 들었습니다. 왜 그런지 아세요? 어차피 다른 사람 아무도 전문가가 없는데 내가 지금부터 제 주특기인 피땀 눈물 어린 수고를 하면 충분히 전문가가 될 수 있겠다라고 생각을 했습니다. 그리고 13시간, 14시간, 15시간씩 일했습니다. 2014년도에 그 사우디 아람코라고 하는 발주처와 했던 협상이 기억이 나고 여러분에게 오늘 그걸 대표적인 예로 소개를 좀 드리고자 합니다. 그 당시 저희는 사우디 아람코의 프로젝트를 수행하면서 약 9억 불의 손실을 봤어요. 만약에 여기에서 저희가 클레임에 성공을 하지 못하면 저희 회사가 없어지는 위기에 있었습니다. 2014년 6월 14일을 저는 잊지 못합니다. 발주처와 저희 회사 사장님을 비롯한 전체 주요 매니지먼트가 모여서 처음에 킥오프 미팅을 했습니다. 그때 저는 유일한 여성이었습니다. 그리고 나서 7차례에 걸쳐서 저희가 협상을 했고요. 지금은 좀 달라졌을지 몰라도 그 당시 사우디는 여자는 프로퍼티였습니다. 그래서 강아지를 집에 놓고 나갈 때 문을 잠그고 나가듯이 여성을 놔두고 갈 때는 문을 잠그고 나가는, 남성에게는 가장 비싼 소중한 프로퍼티지 인격체가 아니었습니다. 어딜 가나 사우디 아람코 빌딩에도 여성 화장실이 없는 건물이 많았고요. 지금은 달라졌지만 여성에게는 운전면허증도 허용되지 않는 나라입니다. 바깥에서 외식을 하려고 하면 여자 혼자만 못 나가고요. 남자와 함께 패밀리 룸을 가야만 외식이 허용되는 나라입니다. 그런 사우디 아람코에서 제가 협상 자리에 섰을 때 여성으로서 따박따박 할 말을 다 하니 사우디 아람코의 그 매니지먼트들은 굉장히 처음엔 놀랐습니다. 그리고 제가 영어 이름이 헬렌인데 헬렌은 들어오지 말아라 라고 저희 사장님에게 부탁을 했어요. 그래서 뒷자리에 앉아 있겠다는 약속을 받고 앉아서 협상을 시작을 했고, 그런데 부당하게 나오면 제가 가만히 있을 사람이 아니기 때문에 또 앞에 나가서 싸우고, 그렇게 해서 거의 7개월이 지났습니다. 그리고 사우디 아람코에서는 미드라는 잡지에 내서 SK를 타절시키겠다. 너무 터무니없는 요구를 한다라고 했습니다. 그 당시 저는 새벽 3시에도 잠을 이룰 수가 없었습니다. 제 협상 많은 사람들이 있었지만 협상의 일원으로 참가했던 저는 회사의 사원을 걸고 일했다라고 생각을 했습니다. 12월 31일 결국 저희는 9억 1천만 불을 받아내는 클레임의 성공을 이룰 수 있었고 세틀먼 어그리먼트에 저희가 서명을 했습니다. 그리고 SK건설은 지금까지 그 이후로 흑자의 많은 그 성공 사례를 이루고 있습니다. 꿈을 이야기하고 싶습니다. 저 바로 전에 얘기했던 연사께서 꿈에 대해서 얘기를 하셨습니다. 저 역시 꿈을 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 가슴 두근거리는 일을 했으면 좋겠습니다. 그런데 그 가슴 두근거리는 그 꿈을 이루기 위해서는 꼭 해야 하는 것이 있습니다. 첫 번째, 자신의 장점과 단점을 치밀하게 분석을 해야 합니다. 만약에 제가 뉴질랜드 가서 요리에 더 장점이 있었으면 저는 스시집을 했을 거예요. 그래서 어떻게 하면 스시를 가장 잘 만들 수 있을까 연구를 했을 것 같습니다. 그런데 저는 공부를 잘했고 논리적인 사고 구조가 있었습니다. 성실했습니다. 그래서 법대에 도전을 했습니다. 또 하나 단점이 있었습니다. 저는 체력이 굉장히 약했어요. 그리고 여자였고 나이가 많았습니다. 그러나 저는 제 단점을 부끄러워하지 않아요. 여기에서 보면 직물이 있는데 날줄과 씨줄이 함께 있어야 하나의 직물이 완성이 됩니다. 장점만 가지고는 나가 완성이 안 됩니다. 여기에 계신 누구나 다 마찬가지예요. 단점을 숨기고 드러내려고 하지 말고 단점을 분석하고 극복하는 방법을 치밀하게 연구하고 그것을 하루하루 수행하는 것이 중요하다고 생각합니다. 그래서 저는 지금도 SK건설에서 하고 있는 것이 여자라서 나이가 많아서 할 수 없는 부분에 대해서 여자이기 때문에 나이가 많은 사람이기 때문에 더 잘할 수 있는 영역을 하나 더 개척해 가고 있다라는 심정으로 일을 하고 있습니다. 들어주셔서 감사합니다.
스토리가 너무 훌륭하시네요. 우리 다음 스피커는요. G&G 소싱 부사장인 차명옥 선생님입니다.
안녕하십니까. 저는 성공을 했다기보다는 성공을 하기 위해서 저희들 나름의 방법을 찾은 작고 재미나는 회사 얘기를 들려드리려고 왔습니다. 저희 회사는 미국과 유럽에서 주문을 받아서 대부분을 중국에서 생산해서 수출하는 무역회사입니다. 저희 회사 창업자가 창업할 당시에 이제 본인이 곧 예비 엄마가 될 예정이었으므로 본인이 알고 있는 그 한국적 현실에서 아이들을 키우고 일을 할 수 없다는 걸 잘 알기 때문에 본인이 회사를 만들어서 그런 엄마들과 같이 일하겠다는 그런 계획을 가지고 있었습니다. 근데 그 창업 후에 이제 진짜 직원을 구하려고 했을 때 회사 재정 상태가 대부분의 회사들이 지급하는 그런 급여를 줄 수 없는 상황이었기 때문에 회사 대표는 여러 가지 고민을 한 끝에 몇 가지 방법을 찾아냈습니다. 그 방법이 엄마들이 아이들을 돌볼 수 있도록 근무 시간을 줄임과 동시에 급여는 근무한 시간에 비례해서 준다. 대신 출퇴근 시간을 굉장히 철저히 지켜줄 것이다. 그리고 아이들에게 무슨 일이 생기면 언제든지 엄마들이 달려가서 돌볼 수 있도록 회사가 시간을 배려한다. 그리고 무역회사이기 때문에 출장을 많이 가야 되는데 출장은 원하는 사람만 보내겠다라는 방법을 세우고 이 내용을 지역에 근거한 인터넷 카페에 올렸는데 생각보다 너무나 많은 영어를 잘하고 섬유업계에 경력이 있는 그런 분들이 지원을 해서 저희들이 깜짝 놀랐었습니다.
그래서 이 지원자들을 보면은 육아 때문에 퇴직을 했고, 그리고 퇴직 이후에 2 내지 5년의 시간을 보내고 있었고, 이분들은 취업을 하기 굉장히 힘든 시간을 보내고 있었습니다. 그러면 이 방법을 쓰고 있는 저희 회사는 잘 운영이 되고 있나? 그 답은 현재까지는 그렇다고 말씀드릴 수 있습니다. GNG는 2010년에 사업을 시작했고 2014년에 첫 정규직 직원을 채용했고 2019년 현재 한국에서 7명, 중국에서 2명 이렇게 9명의 식구가 같이 일하고 있습니다. 현재까지 아주 낮은 이직률을 보이고 있고 직원들의 이 낮은 이직률이 성공의 척도가 아닌가라고 생각을 하고, 그리고 직원들이 짧은 시간에 일을 해야 되기 때문에 굉장히 일의 그 집중도 또한 굉장히 높은 그런 장점이 있습니다. 직원들을 채용할 때 회사가 보장하겠다고 하는 그런 장점을 누리게 하기 위해서는 회사와 가까운 곳에 있는 직원들을 채용하는 게 중요한 문제였기 때문에 회사와 걸어서 20분 거리에 있는 사람들을 저희들은 채용을 했고, 그리고 다 같이 팀워크를 이루는 것을 좋아하는 사람을 채용을 했고, 그리고 가능하면 비슷한 성향의 사람들을 채용해서 서로 잘 어울릴 수 있도록 하는 그런 채용 방침도 저희들이 사용한 것이 도움이 많이 되었다고 생각합니다. 화면에 보시는 것처럼 지금 대부분 5분 내지 20분 이내에 직원들이 같이 일을 하고 있고, 스텔라는 1세와 5세 아이 엄마이고, 소피아는 3세, 지우는 9살과 13살의 엄마이고, 조는 13살 딸아이 엄마이고, 세림은 5살 아이의 엄마이고, 미셸은 저이고 저는 아이가 없습니다. 그리고 시오는 2명과 5살과 8살 두 아이의 엄마이기도 합니다. 저 면접을 할 때 그 워킹맘들에게 물어보면, 시간이 나면 뭘 하고 싶냐고 물어보면 그들은 아이들 없이 영화도 좀 보러 가고 쇼핑몰도 제발 좀 혼자 갔으면 좋겠다, 그런 재미난 얘기를 했기 때문에 저희들은 2달에 한 번 영화를 보러 가기도 하고 쇼핑몰에 또 가끔씩 갑니다. 가서 뭘 많이 사는 게 아니라 그 길을 막 돌아다니면서 즐거워하죠. 그래서 회사가 줄 수 있는 작은 해방감을 저희들은 직원들에게 선물하고 있습니다. 그리고 저는 늘 직원들에게 적게 주는 급여 때문에 미안하다고 생각을 하는데, 직원들은 회사가 돈으로 환산할 수 없는 그런 배려를 해줘서 또 고맙다고 생각을 하고 있습니다. 그러면 회사는 이 방법으로 잘 지탱할 수 있나 라고 하면, 이 방법이 일반적으로 회사를 운영하는 방법이 아니기 때문에 나름의 또 문제가 있습니다. 회사는 직원들이 연장 근무하는 것을 원하지도 않고, 직원들 또한 연장 근무하지 않습니다. 못합니다. 아이들 데리러 가야 되기 때문에. 그래서 직원들이 일을 끝내지 못하고 퇴근을 하면 회사 대표와 저가 그 나머지 일들을 다 해야 됩니다. 그런데 대표는 또 두 아이 엄마이기도 하고, 그래서 아이들 재우고 난 다음에 늦은 시간에 또다시 일을 하는 일이 자주 발생하고 있습니다. 그리고 저는 회사에서 일어나는 모든 일을 제 업무, 본인의 업무가 있는 데도 불구하고 직원들이 일을 잘할 수 있도록 지원해야 되기 때문에 회사 대표와 저는 따로 정해져 있는 근무 시간이 없습니다. 그래서 이게 일반적인 회사가 운영되는 방법이 아니라는 걸 저희들은 잘 알고 있고, 그래서 한계도 가지고 있죠. 그래서 이걸 어떻게 해결할 것인가? 좀 돈이 많으면 직원들을 더 많이 채용해서 저희들의 업무 부담을 좀 줄일 수가 있죠. 그래서 또 이 시장의 그 트렌드도 변하기도 하고, 그래서 GNG는 지금 현재 사용하고 있는 OEM 방식에서 ODM 방식으로 변화를 시도하고 있습니다. GNG ODM 방식은 저희 회사에서 양말을 주로 수출하는데, 양말을 디자인해서 엔드 카스모와 GNG 사이에 있는 수입업자를 배제하고 좀 더 좋은 가격으로 그들과 직거래하는 방식을 의미합니다. 시도한 지는 한 2년 정도 되었는데 결과가 아주 많이 나오진 않지만 충분한 가능성을 가지고 있다고 생각을 하고 저희들은 또 끊임없이 노력하고 있습니다. GNG의 목표가 있다고 하면 저희들은 오랫동안 일할 수 있는 회사가 되어서 그 엄마들과 같이 일하는 게 저희들의 목표입니다. 지난 10년 동안 운 좋게 또 저희들과 같은 방식의 회사와 일하는 것을 즐길 줄 아는 그런 엄마들을 찾았고, 그리고 그 지역 인터넷에서 저희들과 일하고 싶어하는 많은 엄마가 있다는 것을 저희가 알게 됐기 때문에 저희들은 보물창고를 하나 찾았다 이런 생각을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 GNG는 회사 근처에 살고 또 일하면서 아이들을 키우기를 간절히 소망하는 그런 엄마들이 출퇴근 시간에 너무 많은 시간을 소비하지 않아도 된 그런 회사를 정말 바라고 있다고 생각을 하거든요. 그래서 그들은 좀 적은 그런 임금도 잘 참아내고 있다라고 감사히 생각하고 있습니다. 그래서 어떻게 하면 이 엄마들과 같이 오래오래 일할 수 있나, 그러려면 이제 그 대표와 저의 일과 개인 생활에 대한 시간이 조금 주어져서 저희들도 오래 일할 수 있는 준비를 할 수 있는 그런 상황이 되어야 하고, 그리고 끊임없이 포기하지 않고 저희들도 노력해서 GNG가 큰 회사가 되기보다는 정말 엄마들이 가고 싶어하는 그런 회사를 만드는 것이 저희들 목표이고, 그 목표를 위해서 끊임없이 노력할 것입니다. 감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다. 우리 마지막 대표는요, 러시아에서 세어 하시는 미시스 반다리안카인데 오늘 이 자리에 찾아오시지 못하셔서 대신 딸인 안나가 하도록 하겠습니다.
Hello everyone. Forgive me for my English. It's not very good, but I will try my best. My name is Anna. The title of the session is Fly on the Wings of Inspiration, and I want to tell I have an honor to present a woman who is the biggest inspiration to me, and not only to me, but to any woman who is lucky enough to meet her. And my husband told me to say that to men too. She is the biggest inspiration to everyone. This woman is my mother, Galina Bondaryanka. She does not like to take pictures, so I don't have very good ones. Actually, she was supposed to be here herself, but she is a businesswoman, and businesswomen live by the rules of business. They never know when emergency meeting is going to come up. Today, she is in Moscow meeting with members of Russian government and, as usual, fighting for the future of her company. But as we say in Russia, there is no bad without good. And I think it might be even better that I will be presenting her, because otherwise she would be just talking about her work, not about herself and her great contribution to the work and her persistence and ability to never give up. That's her. Both of my parents graduated from Odessa National Maritime University, where they met and got married. Back then, it was the best university in the Soviet Union that prepared very high qualified managers for sea and fishing industry. After graduation, to the big surprise to everyone, they decided to be assigned for work to the far, far east of Russia, small island Sakhalin, where my father became one of the managers in port, and my mother worked in the financial department of Far Eastern Shipping Company. They were very valuable employees, and they had 3 children, including me, and the future seemed bright and stable until the Soviet Union collapsed. Together with plans, hopes, and lives of millions of people. My father was fired from his job without any chance of finding any work in the house of post-Soviet chaos. And my mother was diagnosed with radiation exposure, with little chance to live. Anyone would give up at this point, but not them. My mother decided that it was not her time to go, and she quit her job to support my father in establishing their own fishing company, which became their first child, company Poseidon. They began the adventure by catching salmon and sea urchin, which was very demanded product in Japan. But it was not enough to catch it. You had to know how to sell it. And my mom became the best expert in Russia in this. To this day, people who catch sea urchin come to her for advice, and she helps with what she can. Sea urchin season spans from December to the following September, and it has to be delivered for the auction alive. So during this period, my mother was traveling back and forth from Sakhalin to Japan on small vessel in any weather condition possible. From the whole bunch of the sea urchin, she could pick up the best quality product, negotiate with Japanese traders, which is not very easy, and get the highest price possible. But that's how the first profit of company Poseidon was made. But the highest gain was her life, because while she was working with sea urchins, she ate a lot of it herself, and it is rich in iodine, which removes radiation from the body, so you can say she was miraculously cured by her work. But this was just a beginning. In 1991, the company has joined in a project with German investors to build 4 out of group of 15 fishing trolling vessels to catch and process Alaska pollock. They have bet everything they had on this project. But in 1993, when the construction of the vessels was in full progress, my parents were informed that their company is too small to receive pollock quotas, which meant that these 4 vessels would not be able to work, and Poseidon would not be able to pay for them. With heavy heart, Poseidon had to give up 3 vessels and began a fight to receive enough quotas for at least one of them. For 2 years, Galina, my mom, was preparing documents proving that the company is eligible to receive quotas for pollock, and my father was negotiating with Russian government in Moscow. In 1995, this fight was won, and state-of-the-art trawler named Mys Kurbatova was launched in Germany, in Bremen. My mother became also a godmother of the vessel. With this honorable title, godmother is selected to bring good luck and protection to the vessel. She attended the ship ceremonial launch and naming ceremony, where she blessed, officially named the ship, and cracked a bottle of champagne on the hull for good luck. Galina's portrait takes the central place in the wardroom of the vessel, and I believe her strong positive energy does bring a good luck to it. Luck is very important in any business, especially in fishing, but my parents always say that the good crew is a guarantee for success. That's why they have been paying very close attention to the members of the crew they pick up. The first crew of Mys Kurbatova, picked up in 1995, have worked together for more than 20 years. Some members continue to work in Poseidon even now, more than 25 years later. You all know it is not easy to work with people. Everyone has its own demands, expectations, and personal issues. But I have seen it on my mother's example, that women in the leading role can make this work with the ability to listen, to understand, and support, can make this work more effective and smooth. Galina became like a mother to each and every member of the vessel. They can always come to her with their problems and share their opinions and ask for advice. and she always helps them. This is paid back by loyalty and respect, but most importantly, high dedication to work and as a result, best quality product produced. Another thing that my parents always teach us to do and do it themselves is to work honestly. They always take responsibility for their words and their actions, which is not always easy in Russian reality, where a situation changes very quickly. So every morning my mother begins with reading all the changes in fishing, financial and ecological requirements for fishing companies. She never stops to develop herself and to learn something new. She is always prepared for any situation legally with up-to-date knowledge. With this strategy, Poseidon very quickly made its name as honest, reliable, and easy to work with company that produces very high-quality products. As I said before, the main product they produce is Alaska Pollock and Alaska Roe, which is successfully exported to South Korea, Japan, Europe, and also sold in Russia. Pollock is caught in Bering and Okhotsk Sea, and it is the second most important fish species in the world in terms of total catch. So you can imagine the competition in this area is very high, but so is the demand for Poseidon products. Relatively small size of the company has its advantage in total quality control. Now Poseidon catches 15,000 tons of pollock a year. The fillet exported in 7.8 kilogram blocks, but for Russian market it is cut into cubes, vacuumed in packages of 900 grams and sold in retails. The demand is high and stable. You might say that it is a good ending of the long story, but even now, of course, it's not as easy as it seems. Poseidon has to face many political, economical, and social challenges every day on its way. I don't have time to talk about all of this, but I can say as a witness of all of it that thanks to my father's strategic thinking and my mother's dedication to work, attention to details, unbelievably quick and sharp brains, they are able to overcome all of this. I don't know who supports whom in the situation. I think it's like two loving hands that hold the company together. Out of all small fishing companies established in 1990s in Sakhalin, Poseidon remains the only one operational, and I think it says a lot. Nowadays, my brother joined the company, and he became a great support to my parents, and me and my sister also help with what we can. And we always talk with my brother and my sister how lucky we are to have parents like this. Especially me and my sister to have such inspiration as my mother. And I hope I will become the same inspiration to my daughter.
네, 감사합니다. 시간이 얼마 있지 않아서 제가 간단하게 질문을 준비했습니다. I will ask some questions to all of you. Yes. The first question is to Mrs. Sajasuren. What skill or skills should the leader have? And could you give some advices to other next generation of leaders, please?
Thank you very much. I think it was all very inspiring stories. Thank you so much. I know that we're running a bit late, so I will be very brief. I want to, from also my own experience, rather than advice, share two main points. One, I think as women, we have to be everybody, but especially women, we have to be very brave, not underestimate ourselves, and aim higher. Because I found out in the last 30, 40 years of being sort of a more conscientious life, I suppose, that women, we tend to underestimate ourselves, and stereotypes that exist still are very strong. And so men underestimate ourselves, we underestimate ourselves, even we underestimate each other. And probably younger generation probably thinks, no, this is not true. But it's so much embedded in our heads that, we have to probably do twice as much as men do in order to be recognized and received at the same level or and appreciated, but also be braver. And maybe I can just use one example from my life. Nowadays, again, young people, they all want to go to best universities, and but during the communism, before 1990, Mongolia was closed, and before the Berlin Wall fell, for us the whole world finished at the Berlin Wall, Eastern Europe, right? And when Mongolia opened up, I was in my mid-20s, and because we didn't know what existed beyond the Berlin Wall, of course everybody wanted to go and see the West. And I said, okay, my friend who was studying with me in Prague, she went to London, did the babysitting work. She learned English and she earned some money, and so it was very interesting for 6 months. So I asked my English teacher, David, can you maybe find me 6 months babysitting work in London? And it was the evening classes in English, and he told me off, saying, well, I'll go for 2 weeks back home for Christmas and come back. I'm talking about 1990, 89, 1990, the winter. And he came back, of course, those days, internet, nothing existed. He brought back 2 application forms, one for Cambridge University and another was for Imperial College of London. I've heard about Cambridge, but I didn't know about the Imperial College of London. And he said, okay, Owen, let's try to fill those forms. So we filled the application forms, sent it, of course, in snail mail, and 2 months and a half, we received a reply from Cambridge University saying, okay, well, we probably will accept you, but because it's so far away, we don't know how to interview you, so we'll just test our luck. So I ended up to being the first Mongolian to apply and be accepted to Cambridge University to do a PhD. And again, it's been so many years ago, more than 30 or so years ago, so the things have completely changed. But I think unless you have a good mentor, unless you aim higher, if you don't underestimate yourself, you probably end up doing great things. And otherwise, probably I would have been quite happy also doing a 6 months babysitting work as well. So I think being braver, being more courageous and taking more risks in your life, I think will pay off always. Thank you.
Наш следующий вопрос будет на русском языке, но я непременно вам переведу на корейский, может, английский. Юля, мы услышали очень интересную историю и то, с какой самоотдачей и энтузиазмом вы занимаетесь благотворительной деятельностью. Скажите, пожалуйста, а как вы ищете детей, которые нуждаются в вашей помощи? 지금 우리가 아주 봉사활동에 대한 재미있는 얘기 많이 들었죠. 그래서 그 도움을 필요로 하는 아이들 어떻게 찾는지 좀 얘기 좀 해주시겠어요?
Ну, мы не только, у нас основная задача, мы не выискиваем
Извините, пожалуйста. 저기 영어판 좀 들어주셨으면 좋겠습니다. 질문, 대답, 우리가.
Дело в том, что самая главная наша задача – это не то, что помочь точечно конкретному ребенку определенному. То есть, естественно, что раз я занимаюсь такой деятельностью, то и в Фейсбуке, и везде мы общаемся с различными благотворительными движениями, благотворительными фондами, и вообще люди постоянно объявляют какие-то сборы для детей. Вот. Я не знаю, как это происходит в душе у меня, но вот цепляясь за какого-то определенного ребенка, не знаю, что происходит на уровне какого-то подсознания или внутреннего чувства. И я еще раз говорю, что у меня нет как конкретной такой вот задачи точечно помочь этому данному ребенку. Просто, естественно, я не говорю, что эта помощь идет, она идет. Конкретному ребенку объявляется сбор, какая-то помощь дополнительная, не просто денежная, а именно такая вот моральная, призвать всех людей. Потому что у каждого человека, я уверена, просто у каждого человека живет внутри такая доброта и желание помочь, поделиться с кем-то, иначе бы мы не были людьми. Ну, просто многие об этом не задумываются, занимаются какой-то своими делами, своей семьей. Ну вот наша цель такая, чтобы на примере каждого конкретного ребенка мы могли объять как можно больше людей и помочь людям дать выход вот этому вот всему желанию помочь и быть полезным.
Спасибо большое. 네, 아주 이사님께서 아주 다양한 이력을 갖고 계시네요. 마이크. 네, 그래서 그 지금 시간이 많이 남지 않았지만 그 자기 인생의 신조 크레도 좀 얘기해 주시겠어요?
네네. 그 제가 이럴 때가 있었습니다. 그러니까 눈을 뜨면 내가 오늘 어떻게 살지? 그 생각 때문에 눈물이 나던 살아있다는 것 자체가 굉장히 무겁게 느껴지던 때가 있었어요. 그때 저를 지금 제가 만날 수 있다면 이 얘기를 해주고 싶어요. 그때 이후에 제가 늘 제 마음속에 힘겨운 일이 있건 기쁜 일이 있건 제 마음속에 되뇌이는 세 글자입니다. 그게 바로 around the corners라는 거예요. 모퉁이만 돌면 정말 지쳐서 힘들어서 주저앉고 싶고 더 이상 이제 못 가겠다. 난 여기에 그냥 앉아 있겠다. 할 때가 많아요. 그럴 때 조금만 더 힘을 내서 일어나서 모퉁이를 도니까 정말 예기치 않는 놀라운 일들이 제 인생에서 기다리고 있었어요. 근데 제가 그때 힘을 조금만 더 내서 모퉁이를 돌지 않았으면 저는 그 일을 마주치지 못했을 거예요. 또 반대로 제 인생에서는 굉장히 내가 잘하고 있다. 나 참 잘 나간다. 라고 생각할 때가 있었어요. 근데 모퉁이만 도니까 또 위기가 기다리고 있었어요. 그래서 인생 자체에 대해서 나는 겸손해야 해. 라고 되뇌이곤 합니다. Around the corner. 그 얘기를 해주고 싶습니다.
네, 네. 고맙습니다. 네, 다음 질문은 네. 우리 주변에 일하고 싶거나 아니면은 자기 능력을 발휘하고 싶은 젊은 엄마들에게 어떻게 하면 더 많이 일할 수 있는 기회를 줄 수 있나요?
저는 첫 번째 그 일하고 싶은 엄마들이 스스로 포기하지 않아야 되는 것이 굉장히 중요하고 그리고 주변에 있는 우리 모두가 할 수 있다. 이렇게 주문을 같이 좀 걸어주셨으면 좋겠습니다. 그리고 제가 늘 안타깝게 생각하는 것 중에 하나가 지금 회사에 운영하고 있는 그 모든 윗부분에 계신 분들이 남자분들이기 때문에 이 육아하는 엄마들의 심정과 현 상황을 그렇게 잘 이해 못 하신다고 생각하거든요. 그래서 저는 제가 시간이 있으면 그분들 만나서 얘기하고 싶습니다. 그렇게 많이 어렵지 않으니 딱 정해져 눈에 보이는 그 방법 말고 조금만 틀어서 생각하시면 우리 엄마들에게 많은 기회를 줄 수 있다라는 그 출발점에서 시작하셔가지고 방법을 좀 찾았으면 좋겠고 그리고 그 방법이 무엇이든지 간에 조금씩 제가 지금 겪고 있는 그 시행착오를 겪으면 나름의 방법이 찾아지지 않을까 생각합니다. 그래서 마법을 좀 걸어주십시오.
네, 고맙습니다. And my last question to our last speaker. Being a Russian myself, I perfectly understand how difficult it is to succeed in business in Russia as well. It is dealing with the corruption and bureaucracy and the crime. And my question is, where does your mother got the inspiration and power to stand up against all the time we faces all these problems?
Of course, my mother will answer it better, but I think, I believe that no matter how strong the woman is inside personally, her source of powers come from the family. And I think from the beginning of all of this, my mother, the best inspiration was her children. I remember when she was sick and doctors told her to say goodbye to us, and she was very surprised. She said, but they are not grown up yet, so I cannot say goodbye to them. I think that was the best motivation for her. And my father is the best support, mutual support. So it's not personal ambitions or needs to prove yourself something. It's motivation to do something for your loved ones, for children, family.
Thank you. 이렇게 다양한 스토리지만 약간 좀 비슷한 점이 있습니다. 이거는 다 성공의 길입니다. 성공이라는 게 어떻게 보면은 좋은 단어이기는 하지만 해석할 수 있는 방향이 아주 다릅니다. 누군가에는 성공은 사회의 인정을 받는 것이고요. 누군가에는 자기 꿈을 이루어지면서 살아가는 것이고요. 누군가에는 아무리 힘들어도 거듭하는 위기를 극복하면서 이겨나가는 것이 될 수도 있어요. 지금 이렇게 가족, 자기 꿈, 자기 남편, 자기 자식한테 발상을 받은 분들이 여러분들께도 이 앞으로 발상의 대상이 되시기를 바라면서 우리 세션 마치도록 하겠습니다.